Susan Tang, at 80, was a shadow of the vibrant woman she'd once been. Her hands, calloused and cracked, bore the scars of decades spent rising at 4 a.m. to sift through the city's refuse, collecting scraps to sell so her husband, Mark Shen, a retired military commander, and their son, Jason, could eat. Her clothes, patched and faded, hung loosely on her frail frame, starkly contrasting the polished image expected of a commander's wife in their small, tradition-bound town. For 59 years, she'd poured her life into her family, her love for Mark, a dashing officer when they married, fueling her sacrifices. Society demanded she uphold his honor, and she did, even as her body and spirit wore thin. Each dawn, Susan trudged through alleys, the stench of garbage clinging to her skin. She'd return home to cook meager meals, her fingers trembling from the cold, her heart heavy with unspoken dreams. Mark, once her hero, had grown distant, and his military pension and subsidies were a mystery he had never explained. Jason, now middle-aged, leaned on her too, his demands for money constant. Susan never complained. Love, she believed, meant endurance. But endurance had its price. Her health faltered, aches she ignored, illnesses she couldn't afford to treat. Yet in her heart, a flicker of pride remained. She was the backbone of her family, the silent strength behind a commander's legacy. That winter, fate struck. Slipping on the icy pavement while hauling trash, Susan's leg snapped. The pain was blinding, but she limped to the hospital, clutching her savings, a thin stack of bills earned over the years. At the counter, she hesitated over a $10 painkiller shot, her frugality a reflex. "I'll manage," she told the nurse, her voice hoarse. As she turned to rest, a sight froze her. Mark, his silver hair still striking, stood in the corridor, hand in hand with Laura, his old flame from before their marriage. Laura's laugh, bright and careless, echoed as Mark paid $10,000 for her hyaluronic acid injections, a luxury Susan could scarcely imagine. Just yesterday, he'd pleaded for grocery money, his eyes pitiful. Now, he beamed at Laura, their intimacy a blade to Susan's heart. Her chest tightened, the betrayal sinking in. Mark hadn't just lied. He'd siphoned his pension and military subsidies to Laura for years, leaving Susan to toil in poverty. The realization churned with memories. Nights she'd gone hungry so Jason could have seconds. Days she'd sewn her shoes to save coin. Her love for Mark, once a fire, was now ash. Rage and grief surged, and a stroke seized her vision blurring as she collapsed. She heard Jason's voice in the haze, not with concern, but with annoyance. "Mom, stop being dramatic," he snapped, looming over her bed. "I gave Dad your savings. He bought gifts for Aunt Laura. You've covered my wedding fund already. You're useless now. Let Aunt Laura take your place and die early." His words were a second wound. Jason, the boy she'd rocked through fevers, had betrayed her too. He shoved divorce papers into her trembling hands, forcing her to sign as Mark watched, his face impassive. Laura's shadow lingered in the room, her perfume a cruel contrast to the hospital's sterile air. Susan's heart, already broken, shattered. Alone, her strength spent. She faded, her last breath a whisper of regret for a life given to those who despised her. The world darkened, and she was gone, her sacrifices unacknowledged, her love unreturned. As Susan's life slipped away in the hospital's cold embrace, her world dissolved into darkness. But the end was not silence. A warmth enveloped her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She found herself in a realm of mist where a figure emerged, ethereal, cloaked in robes that shimmered like starlight. Its face was ageless, its eyes deep with compassion. "Susan Tang," it whispered, its voice resonating in her soul. "You've borne a lifetime of sacrifice for those who betrayed you. Your heart, though broken, is pure. The heavens grant you a second chance to rewrite your fate." Susan's breath caught. Was this a dream? A deity? An ancestor from the tales her grandmother once spun? The figure extended a hand, and a light pulse surged through her, mending the cracks in her spirit. "Choose your path," it said. "Live for yourself." The mist swirled, and Susan's eyes snapped open. She was no longer in the hospital. The air was crisp, scented with the coal smoke of her old home. Once gnarled and scarred, her hands were smooth and her body was strong. She stood in the kitchen, the calendar on the wall reading 1966, the day Mark returned from the military, discharged for an alleged injury. Susan's heart raced. She was young again, barely 30, her life unspooled to a moment she'd once accepted without question. In her past life, this was when Mark's lies began. He'd claimed a debilitating wound, demanding she work to support him and their 5-year-old son, Jason. She'd complied, love blinding her to his deceit, laboring through decades of hardship while he funneled money to Laura, his first love. Now, reborn, Susan felt the weight of that truth. Her love for Mark, once a beacon, was a chain she'd worn too long. She touched her face, tracing the unlined skin, and a sob escaped her, not of sorrow, but of possibility. The ethereal figure's words echoed, "Live for yourself." In her past life, she'd been the dutiful wife, the commander's shadow, her dreams buried under societal expectations. She'd toiled in fields, nursed Mark's parents, and scavenged trash, all while Mark and Jason leaned on her strength. Her heart ached for the girl she'd been, so full of hope when she married Mark, his uniform gleaming, his promises sweet. That girl had believed in love's endurance. Now, Susan knew better. Love didn't justify betrayal. Her resolve hardened a fire kindling within. She would not repeat her mistakes. Mark's voice broke her reverie. "Susan, I'm home," he called from the courtyard, his tone weary but commanding. She stepped outside, her pulse steadying. There he was, tall, handsome, his military cap tilted just so, a bandage on his hand hinting at his injury. In her past life, she'd rushed to him, fussing over his pain, promising to work so he could rest. Now she saw the lie in his eyes, the subtle smirk he hid. He expected her to fall into place and carry the family she always had. "My wound's bad," he said, leaning on a crutch he didn't need. "The army's giving me subsidies, but it's not enough. You'll need to find work, Susan, for me and Jason." Her stomach churned, not with fear but with clarity. In her past life, she'd nodded, her heart heavy with duty. She'd taken jobs, cleaning, farming, anything to keep them fed, while Mark's subsidies mysteriously vanished. Now she saw the game. He wasn't wounded. He'd faked it to leave the military to be with Laura while keeping Susan as his provider. Society would judge her if she refused. A commander's wife was to serve, to sacrifice. But the mystical vision had unshackled her. She wouldn't be his pawn again. Susan forced a smile, her voice calm. "Of course, Mark. I'll find work." His eyes flickered with relief, unaware of the storm within her. She turned away, her mind racing. In her past life, she'd slaved for decades, her body breaking, her spirit eroding. This time, she'd escape. An idea sparked. She'd heard of rural doctor positions, roles for women with grit and skill. She'd trained as a nurse before marriage, her talent praised by hospital staff. The countryside offered freedom and a chance to serve others, not just Mark. Her heart lifted at the thought. She could heal, not just survive. Susan slipped out as Mark settled inside, boasting of his military days to Jason. The town was quiet and the evening air was cool. She headed to the party secretary's office, her steps purposeful. The secretary, a stern but fair woman, had once encouraged Susan's nursing ambitions. If anyone could help, she could. Susan's reflection in a shop window caught her eye. Young, determined, alive. She whispered to herself, "This is my chance." The betrayal awaited her at home, but so did her rebirth. She would rewrite her fate, not for Mark or Jason, but for the woman she was meant to be. Susan Tang stood in the dim light of her kitchen, the weight of her reborn life pressing against her chest. The calendar read 1966, and Mark Shen, her husband, lounged in the courtyard, his military uniform crisp despite his supposed discharge. His bandaged hand, a prop for his fabricated injury, rested ostentatiously on his knee as he spun tales of valor for their 5-year-old son, Jason. In her past life, Susan had believed Mark's story, a severe wound that ended his career, requiring her to work tirelessly to support him. Now, reborn with the clarity of betrayal, she knew the truth. His injury was a shallow cut, a lie to secure military subsidies and freedom to pursue Laura, his first love, while Susan slaved. The revelation burned. For decades, she'd labored, cleaning homes, farming fields, scavenging trash, her body breaking under the strain while Mark funneled his pension into Laura's luxuries. Her love for him, once a bright flame, had been exploited. Her role as a commander's wife, a cage. In their small town, steeped in patriarchal tradition, a woman's duty was to her husband's honor. Neighbors whispered of Susan's devotion, praising her for upholding Mark's status, but none saw her exhaustion, her dreams buried beneath societal expectations. Her heart ached for the young nurse she'd been, skilled and ambitious before marriage, tethered her to sacrifice. Mark's voice cut through her thoughts. "Susan, come here," he called, his tone edged with entitlement. She stepped outside, her face a mask of calm. His eyes, sharp and expectant, scanned her. "The subsidies won't cover much," he said, adjusting his crutch. "You need to find work. Something steady. For me and Jason." In her past life, she'd nodded, her heart heavy with duty, and taken any job to keep them fed. Now she saw the manipulation. He wasn't wounded, he was orchestrating a life where she toiled and he indulged. The lie was galling, but exposing him now would trap her in arguments, in the town's judgment. She needed a plan. "I'll look for work," she said softly, her voice steady. Mark nodded, satisfied, unaware of the resolve igniting within her. Susan slipped away as he turned back to Jason, her mind racing. She recalled whispers of rural doctor positions, roles for women with medical training, serving villages desperate for care. Before marriage, she'd been a nurse, and her precision and empathy earned praise from hospital staff. The countryside promised escape, a chance to reclaim her skills and live for herself, not Mark. Her pulse quickened. This was her path. She headed to the hospital where Director Carter, a compassionate widower in his 50s, oversaw operations. Carter had known Susan as a nurse, admiring her talent before she left to marry Mark. His office, lined with medical books, smelled of antiseptic and ink. He looked up, surprised, as she entered. "Susan, what brings you here?" he asked, his brow furrowing. She took a breath, her voice firm. "I want to apply for the rural doctor position of Director Carter in Lynn County." His eyes widened. "A rural doctor? But Mark's a decorated officer, injured, they say. You're his wife. Your place is here, supporting him and Jason." The words stung, echoing the town's expectations. A commander's wife was to be a pillar, and her sacrifices were a badge of honor. Susan's throat tightened, memories of her past life flooding back, nights collapsing from fatigue, her hands raw from work, while Mark dined with Laura. She met Carter's gaze, her resolve unyielding. "Mark's injury is minor," she said, choosing her words carefully. "He can manage. I want to serve where I'm needed. Rural healthcare needs skilled hands." Carter leaned back, studying her. He'd seen her potential years ago, urging her to continue nursing. But she'd chosen marriage. Now he saw a fire in her eyes, a woman unshackled. "Have you thought this through?" he asked gently. "Rural life is hard, and returning to the city is not easy. You'd give up your status and the benefits of being Mark's wife." Susan's heart wavered, not for Mark, but for Jason. Leaving her son tugged at her, she remembered his betrayal in her past life. His cruel words as he forced her to sign divorce papers. "I've thought it through," she said, her voice steady. "Nursing was my calling before I became a wife. I want to heal people, not just prop up a title." Carter sighed, his respect for her evident. "You're one of the best nurses I've known, Susan. If you're sure, I'll recommend you to Lynn County." As she left his office, the weight of her decision settled. She was defying not just Mark, but the town's rigid norms. Neighbors would gossip and call her selfish, but the ethereal figure's words from her rebirth echoed. "Live for yourself." She glanced at her reflection in the hospital window, young, determined, alive. Mark's lies awaited her at home, but so did her freedom. She would become a rural doctor, not a commander's servant, and no one, not Mark, not society, would stop her. Susan Tang stepped into her home, the air thick with the scent of coal and betrayal. The dim light of the oil lamp cast shadows on the heated brick bed, where her husband, Mark Shen, sat hand in hand with Laura, his old flame. Their son, Jason, 5 years old and oblivious to the weight of his actions, held a snowflake crisp. Susan's secret treat, saved from her meager earnings, and fed it to Laura with a giggle. Laura's delicate features glowed, her silk scarf a stark contrast to Susan's patched apron, stained from a day at the hospital. The scene was a mockery of family, a tableau of everything Susan had lost. In her past life, she'd endured 59 years of this, Mark's infidelity, Jason's complicity, until she died in a lonely hospital bed. Now, reborn in 1966, she saw it clearly. Her family had built a life without her, using her labor to sustain it. Laura's eyes flicked to Susan, a smirk curling her lips. "Oh, Susan, you're back," she purred, holding out the half-eaten crisp. "Mark and Jason made these for me. Want a taste of my good fortune?" The words were a blade, sharp with provocation. Jason laughed, parroting Laura's tone. "Aunt Laura's the best, Mom." Susan's heart clenched. She'd learned in her past life that Jason, even at 5, had known about Laura's role in Mark's life, hiding it for decades to keep their perfect family intact. The betrayal cut deeper than Laura's taunt, slicing through the love she'd poured into her son. Memories flooded Susan, moments she'd clung to in her past life to justify her sacrifices. She saw herself at 25, nursing Mark's fevered parents through winter, her hands chapped from washing their clothes. She recalled skipping meals to buy Jason a schoolbook, her stomach growling as he smiled. She'd worked fields and cleaned homes, her body aching, to keep Mark's status as a commander intact. The town praised her devotion, calling her the ideal wife, but their praise was a cage. A woman's worth, they believed, lay in her husband's honor, not her dreams. Susan had thought it too, her love for Mark blinding her to the cost. Now, standing in her own home, she felt like an intruder, her sacrifices mocked by Laura's presence. Mark's gaze met hers, and guilt flickered in his eyes for a fleeting moment. He'd always known her pain, yet chosen Laura. He cleared his throat, his tone hardening. "Susan, don't just stand there. We're having guests tonight. Make pork. My injury needs braised meat to heal." The lie was brazen. Susan knew his shallow finger-cut injury was a sham to secure military benefits funneled to Laura's luxuries. She'd obeyed in her past, scurrying to cook despite their poverty. Now her blood boiled, not with anger, but with clarity. She wasn't his servant anymore. Susan's mind drifted to her visit with Director Carter and her request to become a rural doctor. The countryside promised freedom, a chance to heal others and herself. But leaving meant abandoning Jason, the boy she'd rocked through nightmares. Could she do it? She looked at him, feeding Laura another crisp. His loyalty had already swayed. In her past life, he'd forced her to sign divorce papers, calling her useless. The memory steeled her. "I'm not cooking," she said, her voice flat. Mark's jaw tightened. "What did you say?" Laura's smirk faded, her eyes narrowing. Jason pouted. "Mom, you're being mean." The room felt suffocating, their entitlement mirroring the decades she'd endured. Susan's heart ached, not for Mark, but for the woman she'd been. So eager to please, so blind to her worth. She'd once dreamed of nursing, of saving lives, but the marriage had buried that dream. Now, reborn, she felt it stirring, a pulse of purpose. The town would judge her for defying Mark, whispering of her selfishness, but she didn't care. She'd lived for their approval once. It had killed her. "I ate at the hospital," Susan said, turning away. Mark's voice rose. "Hospital meals? You had money and spent it on yourself?" "I thought you were thrifty, Susan. I'm disappointed." The word stung, a weapon he'd wielded in her past life to guilt her into submission. She laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Disappointed? You've never known my sacrifices, Mark. Cook for Laura yourself. She's your first love, right?" His face darkened, but he had no reply. Laura's hand tightened on his, her eyes glinting with challenge. Susan ignored her, walking to her room. She wouldn't serve them tonight or ever again. As she closed the door, Jason's whine followed her. "Mom, don't embarrass me." Susan leaned against the wall, her breath shaky. She wasn't just defying Mark. She was breaking free from the role society had carved for her. The ethereal figure's words from her rebirth echoed. Live for yourself. She would, starting now. Tomorrow she'd push for her rural doctor position, leaving this sham of a family behind. Her heart, though bruised, felt lighter. She was no longer the commander's wife. She was Susan and enough. Susan Tang's footsteps echoed in the hospital corridor, her heart a mix of resolve and ache. The decision to stop serving her husband, Mark Shen, and their son, Jason, was a rebellion against decades of betrayal relived through her rebirth. In her past life, she'd toiled for 59 years, scavenging trash, farming, nursing, while Mark funneled his military subsidies to Laura, his first love, and Jason grew to despise her sacrifices. In 1966, Susan had refused to cook for them, her defiance a spark in the darkness of her former life. She'd moved into the hospital's staff dormitory, a cramped room with a single cot, to prepare for her rural doctor position in Lynn County. The town's whispers followed her. Neighbors clucked that a commander's wife should prioritize her family, not her ambitions. Their judgment, rooted in patriarchal norms, once crushed her. Now it fueled her. At home, chaos erupted without Susan. Mark, accustomed to her care, fumbled domestic tasks. Laura, pampered by his gifts, proved useless. Susan heard from a nurse that Laura had let cattle trample newly planted wheat, ruining the family's grain quota. A meal she cooked sent Mark and Jason to the clinic with food poisoning, their groans filling the ward. Susan, tending patients, felt a grim satisfaction. In her past life, she'd rushed to fix their mistakes, her love for Jason blinding her to their entitlement. Now she saw clearly. They relied on her labor, not her passion. Her heart tugged at Jason's suffering. He was only 5. But her rebirth had taught her a harsh truth. Love couldn't justify exploitation. Susan's mind wandered to her past life. Nights she'd collapsed from exhaustion, her hands raw from work, while Mark dined with Laura. She believed her sacrifices proved her worth as a wife, mother, and woman. The town praised her devotion, but their praise was a chain binding her to a role that erased her dreams. She'd been a skilled nurse before marriage, her talent lauded by Director Carter. Now, she was reclaiming that identity, not for approval, but for herself. Yet, leaving Jason gnawed at her. In her past life, he'd forced her to sign divorce papers, calling her useless. Could she abandon him now, knowing Mark's influence shaped him? Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion. Jason burst into the ward, his face streaked with tears. "Mom, you're abandoning Dad," he cried, his small fists clenched. "I'm hungry, late for school, and my clothes are dirty. My teacher scolded me. Why won't you come home?" His words, rehearsed and sharp, bore Mark's coaching. Susan paused, bandaging a patient's wound, her heart twisting. She remembered Jason's laughter as he fed Laura her snowflake crisps. His loyalty had already swayed. She'd softened at his tears in her past life, guilt driving her to serve them. Now she saw manipulation, not innocence. Jason wanted her labor, not her love, his young mind molded by Mark's entitlement and Laura's flattery. The ward grew quiet, nurses glancing at Susan. The town's expectations loomed. A mother didn't abandon her child, especially a commander's son. But Susan's rebirth had shifted her perspective. She knelt to Jason's level, her voice calm but firm. "I'm your mother, not your maid. If you're hungry, ask your dad. He has subsidies." Jason's eyes widened, unaccustomed to her refusal. "But Dad's hurt," he wailed, echoing Mark's lie about his minor injury. Susan stood, her resolve unyielding. "You think I'm shameful, Jason? Then I'll stay gone." She nodded to a security guard. "Escort him out. Don't let him back in." The guard hesitated, surprised. "Nurse Tang, you always spoiled that boy." "You don't feel bad?" Susan's faint smile hid her pain. "People pay for their choices," she said. "He made his." As Jason was led away, sobbing, Susan returned to her patient, her hands steady but her heart heavy. She reflected on her love for Jason, the nights she'd sung him to sleep, the dreams she'd had for his future. But he'd chosen Laura's charm over her sacrifices, even at 5, because Mark taught him to. Leaving him felt like losing a piece of herself, but staying meant losing all she was. That evening, in the dormitory, Susan sat on her cot, the silence amplifying her thoughts. She pulled out a worn journal, a habit from her nursing days, and wrote, "I loved Jason with everything. But love can't save someone who doesn't see you. I'm choosing me, not because I'm heartless, but because I'm whole." The words, inked by candlelight, were a vow. The town might call her selfish, but she was breaking a cycle. Her mother's, her grandmother's, of women erased by duty. Her rural doctor role awaited a chance to heal others and herself. As she closed the journal, the ethereal figure's whisper from her rebirth echoed, "Live for yourself." Susan nodded to the empty room. She would. Susan Tang's heart pounded as she stood in her cramped dormitory room, her suitcase half packed with essentials for her new life as a rural doctor in Lynn County. The decision to leave her husband, Mark Shen, and their son Jason was a rebellion against the betrayal she'd endured in her past life, 59 years of toil. At the same time, Mark funneled his military subsidies to Laura, his first love, and Jason grew to scorn her sacrifices. In 1966, reborn with the clarity of her deathbed revelations, Susan had stopped serving them, refusing to cook or cater to their demands. The town, steeped in patriarchal tradition, buzzed with disapproval. A commander's wife was expected to uphold her husband's honor, not abandon her family for personal ambition. Yet Susan, fueled by the ethereal figure's whisper from her rebirth, "Live for yourself," was unshackled. Mark's voice shattered her focus. "Susan, come home!" he shouted from the hospital courtyard, Jason in his arms. His eyes were dark with fatigue, his uniform rumpled, a stark contrast to the polished commander he played. Susan stepped outside, her expression cold. "We're out of food," Mark pleaded. "My injury's worse, and Jason needs you. Please don't punish us because you're mad." His words, laced with guilt, were a tactic from her past life, designed to pull her back into servitude. Jason's tearful eyes tugged at her, but she remembered his complicity, feeding Laura her snowflake crisps, his loyalty swayed by Mark's lies. "You have subsidies," Susan said flatly. "Use them." Mark's face hardened. "You're my wife. You can't just leave." His entitlement, once her prison, now fueled her resolve. She'd requested a rural doctor position, her nursing skills a lifeline to freedom. But Mark's refusal to let go threatened her escape. "Enough, Mark," she said, her voice sharp. "I want a divorce." His jaw dropped, panic flashing in his eyes. "Divorce? There's nothing between me and Laura, just pity." The lie was audacious, given his decades of infidelity in her past life. Susan's anger surged, but arguing was futile. She needed proof, something undeniable to break his grip. An idea sparked. The local convenience shop, a hub for neighborhood gossip, was alive after dinner. Susan grabbed Mark's arm, ignoring his protests, and led him there. "Stay quiet," she whispered, crouching behind a stack of crates. The aunties, led by Auntie Juan, a sharp-tongued widow who'd always pitied Susan, were in full swing. Juan said that Susan Tang chopped vegetables and worked herself to death while her husband sneaked off to Laura's. "I saw him buy her a silk dress last week." Another auntie, Mrs. Lee, chimed in. Laura's dripping in gold, while Susan's clothes were rags. Mark's spending his subsidies on that woman, no doubt. A third, younger voice added, "Susan's too loyal. She should divorce him." Mark's face paled, his hand trembling. The truth, laid bare by the community, was a blow he couldn't dodge. Susan's heart raced, not with triumph, but with liberation. She'd ignored the whispers in her past life, too ashamed to face them. Now they were her weapon. The auntie's words echoed the town's unspoken rule. A commander's wife bore her burdens silently. Susan had, for too long, but no more. Mark shoved her hand away, standing to confront the woman. "Shut up!" he roared. "There's nothing improper with Laura." The aunties froze, then erupted. "Please don't lie to us," Juan spat. "You fool Susan, but not us." Mrs. Lee hurled a rotten cabbage, splattering Mark's uniform. Humiliated, Mark turned to Susan, his eyes desperate. "Susan, please explain to me." His plea was pathetic, and a commander was reduced to begging. She'd have defended him in her past life, swallowing her pain to save his honor. Now she stepped back, her silence deafening. The crowd's jeers grew louder, vegetables flying. Mark, reeking of filth, shoved through them, yelling, "Susan, where are you?" But Susan was gone. She'd slipped away, her suitcase in hand, and boarded the earliest train to Lynn County. The station's whistle pierced the dawn, a sound of freedom. As the train rattled forward, Susan stared out the window, the town's lights fading. Her journal lay open on her lap, a refuge for her thoughts. She wrote, "I loved Mark once, enough to lose myself. I loved Jason enough to break for him. But love isn't a debt I owe forever. The town will call me heartless, but I'm choosing life." The words anchored her, leaving Jason hurt. A mother's guilt lingered. But his betrayal, even at 5, was Mark's doing. She reflected on Auntie Juan, whose pity had masked respect. The auntie's gossip, though cruel, had freed her, exposing Mark's deceit to the world. Susan closed her journal, her heart lighter. Lynn County awaited a chance to heal, to be more than a commander's wife. She was Susan Tang, and she was enough. The train's rhythmic clatter faded as Susan Tang stepped onto the platform in Lynn County, the crisp air of 1966 carrying the scent of pine and earth. Her suitcase, light with only essentials, felt like a symbol of her unburdened heart. Behind her lay a town that had caged her, where she'd toiled for 59 years in her past life, scavenging trash to feed her husband, Mark Shen, and son Jason, while Mark squandered his military subsidies on Laura, his first love. Reborn, Susan had defied their betrayal, leaving Mark humiliated by the town's gossip and boarding this train to become a rural doctor. The weight of her past, decades of sacrifice for a family that scorned her, dissolved with each step into this new world. Team leader Lee, a wiry woman in her 40s with a warm smile, greeted Susan at the station. Lee had been a nurse before dedicating herself to rural healthcare, driven by the loss of her sister to untreated illness in a remote village. Her eyes sparkled with recognition as she shook Susan's hand. "Nurse Tang, we're honored you chose Lynn County," she said, taking Susan's suitcase. "Our clinic's small, but the need is great." Susan nodded, her throat tight with gratitude. In her past life, she'd buried her nursing talent to serve Mark. Her skills praised, but unused. Lee's welcome felt like a homecoming to the woman she was meant to be. The village, nestled among rolling hills, was a patchwork of mud brick homes and wheat fields. Children played in the dust, their laughter a stark contrast to the hospital's sterile silence where Susan had died in her past life. I led her to a modest clinic, its walls lined with basic supplies. "You'll start tomorrow," Lee said. "The villagers trust doctors who care." "I hear you're one of the best." Susan's chest swelled. She'd been Mark's wife in her town, her worth tied to his status. Here, she was Nurse Tang and was valued for her skill. The shift was liberating, yet daunting. Could she truly leave her past behind? That evening, Susan settled into a small room above the clinic, its single window framing a starlit sky. She opened her journal, a habit revived from her nursing days, and wrote, "I lived for Mark's approval, Jason's needs, the town's praise. I lost myself to their expectations. Now I'm here to heal, to be Susan, not a shadow." The words grounded her, but her thoughts drifted to Jason. At 5, he was too young to grasp his betrayal fully, feeding Laura her crisps under Mark's influence. He'd grown to call her useless in her past life, forcing her to sign divorce papers, leaving him hurt, a mother's guilt gnawing at her. Yet staying would have killed her, as it had before. She closed the journal, whispering, "I'm choosing life." The next day, Susan opened the clinic, her hands steady as she treated her first patients, a farmer with a sprained wrist and a child with a fever. Her precision, honed years ago, returned like muscle memory. Villagers, wary at first, warmed to her empathy, their smiles a balm to her wounded heart. By week's end, a line formed at dawn, mothers clutching babies, elders seeking relief. "Nurse Tang, you're a blessing," an older woman said, her arthritic hands clasping Susan's. The words filled a void Mark's indifference had carved. In her past life, she'd craved his approval. Now, she found purpose in strangers' gratitude. Lynn County's simplicity contrasted with her town's rigid norms, where a woman's role was to serve her husband, her ambition secondary. Here, Susan saw women like Lee, independent, respected, challenging the patriarchy she'd once accepted. The social shift emboldened her, but doubts lingered. The town's whispers, calling her selfish for leaving a commander's family, echoed faintly. She countered them with action, working late to restock supplies, her exhaustion a choice, not a burden. I noticed, offering tea one evening. "You're driven, Susan," she said. "What brought you here?" Susan hesitated, then shared a truth. "I was trapped in a marriage that erased me. I'm here to find myself." Lee nodded, her own story surfacing. "I lost my sister because no doctor reached her village. I came to change that. You'll find your place here." The shared loss bonded them, Lee's resolve mirroring Susan's. As weeks passed, Susan's reputation grew, and her clinic became a healing hub. She wrote in her journal, "Each patient's smile is a piece of me reclaimed. I'm not Mark's wife or Jason's maid. I'm Susan, and that's enough." The countryside's vastness mirrored her newfound freedom. It was quite a canvas for her purpose. The ethereal figure's words from her rebirth, "Live for yourself," were no longer a command, but a truth she embodied. Susan Tang locked the Lin County Clinic's door, and the evening air was cool against her skin. It was 1966, and her new life as a rural doctor had blossomed over weeks, her skilled hands healing villagers, and her heart finding peace. In her past life, she'd toiled for 59 years, scavenging trash to support her husband, Mark Shen, and son Jason, while Mark diverted his military subsidies to Laura, his first love. Reborn, Susan had fled that betrayal, leaving Mark humiliated by town gossip and establishing herself in this village, free from the patriarchal expectations that once defined her. The town had judged her. A commander's wife abandoning her family was scandalous. But here, she was Nurse Tang, respected for her work, not her husband's title. As she turned to head home, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Mark, his uniform faded, held Jason, whose small face was streaked with tears. "Susan, why are you here?" Mark's voice trembled, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. "We've been starving since you left." Jason clung to him, whimpering. "Mom, come home." Susan's heart lurched. In her past life, such pleas had trapped her, guilt forcing her to serve them until her death. Her rebirth's clarity, bolstered by the ethereal figure's command, "Live for yourself," held firm. She saw their desperation not as love, but as dependence on her labor. Mark stepped closer, his tone pleading. "We're out of food stamps. My subsidies haven't come. Jason needs you." The lie was blatant. Susan knew his subsidies were intact, spent on Laura's luxuries. Jason's voice cut in. "I saw Dad buy Aunt Laura a dress." His honesty, unfiltered by youth, exposed Mark's deceit. Susan's chest tightened, memories of her past life flooding back. Decades of exhaustion, her earnings siphoned to Laura's gold and silk while she wore rags. She'd loved Mark once, enough to break herself for him. Now, his manipulation only steeled her resolve. "You have money, Mark," she said, her voice cold. "Figure it out." His face twisted, anger flaring. "You're my wife. You can't abandon us." He grabbed her arm, his grip tight. In her past life, she'd have softened, fearing the town's scorn. In Lin County, where women like Team Leader Lee lived freely, Susan felt no such chains. She wrenched free, her eyes blazing. "I'm not your wife anymore. Sign the divorce papers, or I'll report your faked injury to the military." Mark staggered his lie, a minor cut exaggerated to secure benefits. Laid bare. The threat was a gamble, but Susan's time in the clinic had taught her strength. She wouldn't yield. Jason's sobs grew louder. "Mom, please, we're hungry." His plea pierced her, a mother's guilt resurfacing. She knelt, studying his face. In her past life, he'd grown to betray her, forcing her to sign divorce papers at 80. Yet at 5, he was a product of Mark's influence and Laura's flattery. Susan's journal, tucked in her bag, held her truth. "I love Jason, but I can't save him from the choices he's already making." She stood, her voice gentle but firm. "Ask your dad for food, Jason. He won't let you starve." Mark stammered. "The subsidies, they're delayed." Susan's laugh was bitter. "Delayed to Laura's wardrobe, you mean?" The confrontation drew villagers' eyes, their curiosity a reminder of the social stakes. In her town, such defiance would brand Susan a disgrace, a woman shirking her duty to a commander. Here, the community valued her work, not her marital status. Yet she felt their gaze, a test of her resolve. Team leader Lee appeared, her presence steadying. "Nurse Tang, is everything all right?" she asked, her tone protective. Lee's defiance, building a clinic despite losing her sister to rural neglect, inspired Susan. "It's fine, Lee," Susan said, her voice steady. "My past came calling, but I'm done answering." Mark's desperation peaked. "Susan, if you stay, I'll lose everything. Jason needs a mother." His admission, needing her labor, not her love, echoed her past life's pain. Susan's heart ached for Jason, but she saw his path, shaped by Mark's lies. She wrote in her journal later, "Leaving Jason feels like tearing my soul, but staying would bury me again. I'm choosing purpose over guilt." Turning to Mark, she said, "You chose Laura long ago. Live with it." She walked away, Lee at her side, Mark's pleas fading behind her. As Susan reached the clinic, the stars above Lynn County shone bright, contrasting the smog of her old town. Her new life, saving lives, not serving liars, was her rebellion against a society that demanded women's silence. Lee's quiet support, rooted in her fight for rural healthcare, anchored Susan. She was no longer Mark's wife, but Nurse Tang, a woman carving her path. The confrontation had tested her, but she'd stood firm, her heart lighter with each step toward her future. Susan Tang stood in the Lynn County Clinic's office, her heart steady despite the chaos unfolding. It was 1966, and her new life as a rural doctor had given her purpose, healing villagers and freeing her from the betrayal of her past life. For 59 years, she'd labored to support her husband, Mark Shen, and son Jason, while Mark diverted his military subsidies to Laura, his first love. Reborn, Susan had fled that life, leaving Mark humiliated by town gossip and defying the patriarchal norms that demanded she remain a dutiful commander's wife. Mark and Jason had now tracked her to Lynn County, begging her to return, their desperation exposing their reliance on her labor. Susan had demanded a divorce, threatening to reveal Mark's faked injury, a minor cut exaggerated to secure benefits. The standoff was tense, but Susan's resolve, forged by her rebirth's mandate, live for yourself, was unbreakable. The office door burst open, and Laura stormed in, her silk dress incongruous against the clinic's bare walls. Tears streaked her face, her voice a wail. "Susan, please stop clinging to Mark. I'm the third wheel, but we love each other." She collapsed to her knees, clutching Susan's skirt. "I'm pregnant with his child. Let us be together." The revelation was a shock, yet Susan felt no jealousy, only clarity. In her past life, Laura's affair had broken her. Now it was a tool. Mark's face paled, his eyes darting between them. "Laura, don't talk nonsense," he snapped, his voice betraying panic. "I only pitied you." Laura's sobs turned sharp. "You're lying. You said Susan forced you to stay. Tell her the truth, or I'll report your faked injury to the military." The threat hit Mark like a blow. His injury, a lie to fund his life with Laura, was his vulnerability. Susan's lips curled into a faint smile. She'd used the same threat moments ago, but Laura's desperation gave it weight. Team leader Lee, standing by the door, watched with quiet intensity. Lee, who'd built the clinic after losing her sister to rural neglect, understood betrayal. Her presence bolstered Susan. The villagers outside whispered their curiosity, a reminder of the social stakes. In Susan's old town, a wife's defiance was scandalous, but her work earned respect here, shifting the power dynamic. Susan pulled out her divorce papers, her voice icy. "Mark, sign for Laura. She needs you more than I ever did." Mark's hands shook, his commander's bravado crumbling. "Susan, you're my wife," he stammered. But Laura's wail cut him off. "You promised me a life, Mark. Don't let my child be fatherless." She collapsed into his arms, whispering just loud enough, "The military won't forgive your lie." Mark shoved her away, his face dark with fury. "After everything I gave you, you threaten me?" The argument exposed their mutual deceit, a spectacle Susan watched with detachment. In her past life, she'd blamed herself for Mark's infidelity, believing she wasn't enough. Now, she saw their dysfunction as their own, not hers. Jason, clinging to Mark's leg, burst into tears. "No, I want Mom!" His cry pierced Susan's heart. At 5, he was caught in Mark's web. his loyalty torn between Laura's flattery and his mother's love. In her past life, he'd grown to betray her, forcing her to sign divorce papers at 80. Now, his sobs stirred guilt and truth. He'd chosen Mark's lies over her sacrifices. Susan knelt, her voice soft but firm. "Jason, I love you but can't fix what your dad's done. You'll be okay." Her journal later captured her pain. "Leaving Jason feels like abandoning my heart, but staying would bury my soul. He's Mark's now, not mine." Mark, cornered, grabbed the divorce papers. His hand trembled as he signed, his eyes avoiding Susan's. Laura's face fell. She'd expected him to fight, not surrender. "Mark, you're choosing her?" she gasped. But he ignored her, his defeat absolute. Jason's wails grew louder, unanswered. Susan felt embarrassed for the scene, but Lee's nod reassured her. "It's done, Nurse Tang," Lee said, her voice kind. "Go back to work." The villagers dispersed, their murmurs fading. Susan apologized to Lee, who waved it off. "Every family has its mess. You're free now." Susan stood tall as Mark, Laura, and Jason left, their silhouettes dejected against the sunset. The divorce was legal closure, but her emotional freedom had begun in Lynn County, where she was valued for her skill, not her marital status. The town's patriarchal norms, demanding a wife's sacrifice, had no hold here. She reflected on her past love for Mark, a love that had blinded her to her worth. Her journal entry read, "I'm not the woman who begged for Mark's approval. I'm Susan, and I'm healing lives, living for me." The clinic awaited its patience, her purpose. The ethereal figure's whisper echoed, a promise fulfilled. Susan was free, her heart whole, her path clear. Susan Tang stepped off the train in her old town, the familiar smog of 1966 heavy in the air. Months had passed since she'd fled to Lynn County, where her life as a rural doctor had blossomed, healing villagers and mending her heart. In her past life, she'd toiled for 59 years, scavenging trash to support her husband, Mark Shen, and son Jason, while Mark siphoned his military subsidies to Laura, his first love. Reborn, Susan had defied that betrayal. Securing a divorce after Laura's dramatic arrival exposed Mark's lies. The town's patriarchal norms, demanding a commander's wife sacrifice her dreams, had branded her selfish. But in Lynn County, she was Nurse Tang, valued for her skill. Now, a hospital director's son's wedding had drawn her back, a brief return to a place she'd outgrown. The town felt smaller, its streets lined with the same judgmental eyes that once caged her. Susan's patched coat, a remnant of her old life, contrasted with the vibrant energy she carried from her new one. The wedding banquet was lively, filled with laughter and clinking glasses, but Susan's thoughts drifted to her past. She'd once dreamed of such celebrations with Mark, his uniform gleaming, her heart full of love. That love had blinded her, leading to decades of labor while he pampered Laura. Her journal, tucked in her bag, held her truth. "I loved Mark enough to lose myself. Now I love myself enough to live." The words anchored her, a shield against the town's whispers. After the banquet, Susan's feet carried her toward her old home, an instinct she couldn't resist. The familiar gate loomed, its paint chipped, a mirror of the life she'd left. Before she could step inside, shouts erupted. "I wanted braised pork, not this slop!" Laura's voice, sharp and entitled, cut through the night. "Redo it, Mark! And you, Jason, sweep the yard, you useless boy!" Susan peered through the gate, unseen. Jason, his small frame hunched, wiped tears as he swept, his broom trembling. Mark, once a proud commander, cowered, his voice submissive. "There's no pork, Laura. We're out of food stamps. I gave you my subsidy. Can you return it?" Laura's laugh was cruel. "I spent it on a movie. Do you dare ask me for money? What else are you hiding?" Her words revealed a dynamic Susan recognized. Mark's devotion and Laura's greed. In her past life, Susan had been the servant, cooking and cleaning while they flourished. Now, Laura's incompetence and Mark's regret painted a grim picture. Jason's quiet sobs tugged at Susan's heart. At 5, he was trapped in their dysfunction, his loyalty to Laura fading as her neglect became clear. In her past life, he'd grown to betray Susan. But now, his tears hinted at a child seeking stability, caught in Mark's mistakes. Susan's mind flashed to her journal. Jason's pain hurts me, but I can't save him from Mark's choices. I chose freedom, not abandonment. She'd loved him fiercely, but his early betrayal, feeding Laura her crisps, parroting Mark's lies, showed his path was set. The town's norms would judge her for leaving her son, insisting a mother's duty was eternal. But Susan, shaped by Lynn County's freer ethos, where women like team leader Lee lived for purpose, knew better. Her role wasn't to fix Mark's mess, but to heal lives in her clinic. The irony of Mark's suffering under Laura was justice, confirming her choice. She turned away, her heart light but heavy with finality. The house, once her prison, held no power. As she returned to the station, the town's lights flickered, a fading memory. Susan reflected on her past life's pain, nights of hunger, her body breaking for a family that scorned her. Now she was Nurse Tang, her clinic a beacon of purpose. The social contrast struck her. Her town chained women to husbands, while Lynn County valued her for her work. She wrote in her journal on the train, "Seeing Mark and Laura's chaos free me. I'm not their savior, but my own. Jason will find his way, or he won't. I can't carry that burden." The train's whistle signaled her return to Lynn County, where team leader Lee awaited her fight for rural health care, a mirror of Susan's resolve. I had shared her story of loss, forging a bond that grounded Susan. The village's hills loomed, a promise of peace. Susan smiled, her past a shadow she'd outrun. The ethereal figures whisper from her rebirth, "Live for yourself," was her mantra, embodied in every patient she healed. Mark and Laura's dysfunction was their own. Susan's life was hers, whole and vibrant, a testament to her strength. Susan Tang walked through Lynn County's dusty streets, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the village. It was 1966, and her life as a rural doctor had become a sanctuary, each patient's recovery a step toward healing her heart. In her past life, she'd labored for 59 years, scavenging trash to support her husband, Mark Shen, and son Jason, while Mark funneled his military subsidies to Laura, his first love. Reborn, Susan had escaped that betrayal, securing a divorce and defying the patriarchal norms of her old town, where a commander's wife was expected to sacrifice her dreams. In Lynn County, she was Nurse Tang and was respected for her skill, not her marital status. Her recent visit to her old town, witnessing Mark and Laura's dysfunctional life, had solidified her choice, but the emotional weight of leaving Jason lingered. As she approached the clinic, a familiar figure waited on the steps. Ryan, the village's merchant, stood with a shy smile, holding a steaming bowl of pork. A widower in his 30s, his weathered hands and kind eyes spoke of a life shaped by loss. His wife had died of illness years ago, untreated due to the lack of rural doctors. "Susan, you've been working hard," he said, his voice soft. "Eat some pork, you're looking thin." His genuine and unassuming concern warmed her, but also stirred unease. Mark's love had been a trap in her past life, his promises masking decades of deceit. Trust felt like a risk she wasn't ready to take. The clinic's patients, lingering nearby, broke into teasing grins. "Ooh, Ryan's smitten," an old farmer called. "Bringing pork to win Nurse Tang's heart." Laughter rippled the village's camaraderie, starkly contrasting her old town's judgmental whispers. There, a woman's worth was tied to her husband. Here, Susan's work earned her a place among equals. Yet the attention unsettled her. She smiled awkwardly, taking the bowl. "Thank you, Ryan, but I'm not hungry." His face fell, but he nodded, undeterred. "All right, but you need to eat sometime," he said, his blush deepening. Susan led him to the clinic's backyard, seeking privacy. The social freedom of Lynn County, where women like team leader Lee lived for purpose, not men, gave her courage, but her past loomed large. "Ryan, I'm not looking for a relationship," she said gently, setting the bowl down. "My marriage, it broke something in me." Her voice wavered, memories of Mark's betrayal surfacing, his secret gifts to Laura, her exhaustion ignored. Ryan's eyes softened, his grief mirroring hers. He said he had heard about his troubles, referencing Lee's account of Mark's visit. "I lost my wife to illness. No doctor came. I don't push, Susan, but I see you. I'll wait if you ever change your mind." His words stirred a warmth Susan hadn't felt in years, but fear followed. She'd poured love into Mark in her past life, only to be discarded. Jason's betrayal, choosing Laura's flattery over her sacrifices, had deepened that wound. Could she open her heart again? Her journal, a refuge for her thoughts, captured her conflict. Ryan's kindness scares me like a light I'm afraid to trust, but maybe one day I'll heal enough to see it. The village's ethos, valuing her for her work, not her past, gave her space to breathe. Unlike her old town's rigid expectations of eternal wifely duty, Susan glanced at Ryan, his patience in contrast to Mark's demands. "You're kind, Ryan," she said, her smile small but genuine. "But my heart's with my patients now." He nodded, his disappointment tempered by respect. "I get it. If you need anything, a friend, not more, I'm here." He turned to leave, but paused. "The village is butchering a pig tomorrow. Come for the feast, to eat, nothing else." The invitation, free of pressure, eased her. "I'll try," she said, the words a tentative step toward connection. As Ryan walked away, Susan sat with the pork, its aroma tempting but untouched. She reflected on her old life, nights of hunger to feed Jason, her body breaking for a family that scorned her. In Lynn County, she ate when she chose and worked for a purpose, not survival. Team leader Lee's influence loomed large. Her fight for rural healthcare had inspired Susan's rebellion. I had shared her loss, her sister's death, forging a bond of mutual strength. Susan wrote in her journal, "I'm not ready for Ryan's light, but I'm not in Mark's shadow either. I'm Susan, and I'm growing and healing enough." The village's hills glowed under the sunset, a canvas of her new beginning. The clinic called its patients her anchor. The social contrast, her town's chains versus Lynn County's freedom, reaffirmed her path. The ethereal figure's whisper from her rebirth, "Live for yourself," was her guide, embodied in every life she saved. Ryan's kindness was a possibility, not a demand, and for now, that was enough. Susan stood, ready for tomorrow's work, her heart open to peace, if not to love. Susan Tang stood outside her Lynn County clinic, the morning air of 1966 crisp with the promise of a new day. Her life as a rural doctor had become her salvation, each patient's recovery a testament to her rebirth. In her past life, she'd labored for 59 years, scavenging trash to support her husband, Mark Shen, and son Jason, while Mark squandered his military subsidies on Laura, his first love. Reborn, Susan had shattered that cycle, securing a divorce and defying the patriarchal norms of her old town, where a commander's wife was expected to sacrifice her dreams. In Lynn County, she was Nurse Tang, revered for her skill, not her marital status. Yet the past lingered, and as she prepared for the day's patients, a familiar voice cut through her peace. "Susan Tang, what are you doing with another man?" Mark's shout was raw, his eyes bloodshot as he stormed toward her, Jason trailing behind. Ryan, the village merchant who'd offered her pork the day before, stood nearby, startled. Mark's fist swung, connecting with Ryan's jaw. "You're still a commander!" Mark roared. "How dare you take my woman?" Susan's heart raced, not with fear, but with fury. In her past life, Mark's jealousy had guilted her into submission. Now it was a desperate grasp at control. Rubbing his jaw, Ryan stepped back, his calm demeanor contrasting Mark's rage. "Commander Shen, Susan's free now," he said, his voice steady, shaped by his loss, his wife's death to illness. Susan shoved Mark, her voice sharp. "What's wrong with you? Not everyone's as shameless as you and Laura." The villagers gathered their murmurs to remind them of the social stakes. In her old town, such a scene would brand Susan a disgrace, a woman defying her husband. Here, her work earned respect, shifting the dynamic. Jason tugged her sleeve, his eyes red. "Mom, check on Dad. He misses you every night." His plea, raw with a child's need, pierced her. At 5, Jason was torn, craving Susan's love, but molded by Mark's lies and Laura's flattery. In her past life, he'd grown to betray her, forcing divorce papers at 80. His tears revealed a boy seeking stability, not just her labor. Susan knelt, her heart aching. "You and your dad chose Laura," she said softly. "She's who you wanted, Jason." I'm not your maid anymore. Mark's voice softened, almost sheepish. Susan, Laura's useless. She can't cook and doesn't wake Jason up for school. I regret it. Come home, let's live right. His admission was a mirror of her past life's pain, decades of her labor enabling his infidelity. Susan stood, her resolve ironclad. You regret it because Laura's harder to control, she said, her voice cold. I'm done being your servant. We're divorced, Mark. Leave, or I'll report your faked injury to the military. Mark's face was drained of color, and his lie, a minor cut exaggerated for benefits, was undoing. Jason's sobs intensified, his small frame shaking. I don't like Laura anymore, Mom. I want you. His words, genuine but late, stirred Susan's guilt. Her journal, a refuge for her truths, later captured her struggle. Jason's love hurts because it's real, but tainted by Mark's shadow. I can't save him from his path. I can only walk mine. The town's norms would demand she return, a mother's duty eternal. But Lynn County's ethos, where women like Team Leader Lee lived for purpose, freed her. She looked at Jason, her voice firm but kind. I'm not your mom anymore, Jason. You'll find your way with your dad. Turning to Ryan, Susan softened. Let's get you patched up. He nodded, his respect for her clear. Mark's voice faded into a broken murmur as they walked to the clinic. Susan, I've lost you. She didn't look back. The villagers dispersed, their support unspoken but felt. Team Leader Lee, whose fight for rural healthcare had bonded her to Susan, met them at the door. You all right, Nurse Tang? She asked, her strength a mirror of Susan's. I'm fine, Susan replied, her smile genuine. Lee's presence, rooted in her loss, grounded her. Inside, Susan bandaged Ryan's bruise, her hands steady. She reflected on her past, nights of hunger, her body breaking for a family that scorned her. She has healed lives, and her clinic is a beacon of purpose. The social contrast was stark. Her town chained women to husbands, while Lynn County valued her for her work. Her journal entry read, Mark and Jason's pleas can't pull me back. I'm Susan, not their shadow. My peace is in these hills, saving lives. The ethereal figure's whisper, live for yourself, was her truth, embodied in every patient. As she prepared for the day, Ryan's quiet support and Lee's camaraderie enveloped her. Susan was home, her heart whole, her purpose clear.